Picture a grand hotel, its opulent halls hiding whispers of a darker past. Now imagine a vanished guest, a trail leading to secret tunnels, and a cast of characters each harboring their own secrets. In the Mystery of Starlake Asylum, shadows of the past collide with present danger, and every clue brings you closer to a chilling truth. Get comfortable. This story will draw you in and keep you on edge until the final reveal. The winding road to Starlake Asylum, now reborn as the lavish Starlake Hotel, stretched beneath a sky heavy with brooding clouds. Vivian Croswell adjusted her scarf against the chill, her sharp eyes scanning the foreboding silhouette of the old asylum. Ornate turrets rose against the darkening sky, their grandeur softened by ivy creeping along weathered stone. As her driver brought the car to a halt, she felt the familiar pull of curiosity, tinged with something deeper, more personal. The grand iron gates creaked open, and the hotel came into full view. Its transformation was undeniable, yet the ghosts of its past seemed etched into its very bones. Vivian, a retired investigator whose intuition had unspooled countless mysteries, sought solace here. But she carried with her the shadow of a family secret. Her late aunt, a woman of delicate constitution, had once been a patient within these walls. Inside, the lobby glimmered with opulence. A grand chandelier bathed the room in golden light, yet it failed to dispel the unsettling undertone of the hotel's past. The polished marble floors seemed to amplify the creak of footsteps, and the walls whispered secrets beneath layers of fresh paint. Vivian's arrival was met by Henry Blackwell, the hotel's charismatic owner. His dark hair was meticulously combed, his smile warm but fleeting. "Miss Croswell," he greeted, extending a hand. "Welcome to Starlake Hotel. I trust you'll find your stay restful." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell," Vivian replied, her gaze lingering on his face. His politeness felt rehearsed, his eyes betraying a guarded wariness. As she ascended the grand staircase to her room, she passed Martha Langley, a maid with nervous hands that clutched her cleaning supplies as though they were a shield. Martha offered a hesitant nod, her gaze flitting to the floor. Dr. Edward Havisham appeared shortly after, descending the staircase with an air of quiet authority. His measured steps and steely composure gave him the appearance of a man accustomed to solving puzzles of the mind. He inclined his head slightly as their paths crossed. "Enjoy your evening," he murmured, his voice smooth but unreadable. At the dinner hour, the grand dining room sparkled with candlelight, its long table adorned with pristine white linens and polished silverware. Guests murmured in subdued tones, exchanging pleasantries over glasses of wine. Among them was Evelyn March, her every movement elegant and deliberate. Dressed in shimmering gold, she exuded the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention, yet her eyes held a flicker of vigilance. James Carter, meanwhile, had positioned himself near the far end of the table, his notebook discreetly tucked beneath his arm. His keen gaze darted between guests, and Vivian could almost see the cogs of his mind turning as he absorbed every detail. Vivian sipped her wine, her senses alert to the subtle undercurrents around her. The polished surface of the evening shattered, however, when a blood-curdling scream pierced the air. Every head turned, cutlery clattering against plates as silence fell like a shroud. Vivian was the first to rise, her instincts sharp as ever. The scream had come from upstairs. Footsteps thundered as Henry Blackwell led the charge, the guests following in a nervous cluster. Vivian stayed a step behind, her sharp gaze cataloging each reaction. Evelyn's eyes narrowing, Carter clutching his notebook like a weapon, and Dr. Havisham's expression betraying a flicker of unease. They reached the source of the disturbance, Lucas Fairchild's room. The door stood ajar, the lock splintered as though forced. Inside, the room lay in disarray. A shattered lamp cast shards of glass across the carpet, the bedsheets twisted as though in a struggle. But it was the absence that screamed the loudest. Lucas Fairchild, the quiet, reclusive guest, was nowhere to be found. Vivian's eyes moved swiftly over the scene. A smudged mirror, muddy footprints leading to the window, a faint trace of lavender in the air. These details imprinted themselves in her mind as the others murmured in confusion and fear. "This is no accident," Vivian said softly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Lucas didn't leave of his own accord." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The shadows seemed to deepen as the weight of the asylum's dark past pressed against them. The mystery had begun. Morning broke over Starlake Hotel with a pale, watery light that did little to dispel the tension from the previous night. The once polished veneer of the grand opening had cracked, revealing an uneasy undercurrent among the guests. In the dining hall, whispers filled the air like a low hum, the staff moving with a nervous urgency. Vivian Croswell sat at a corner table, her breakfast untouched. She traced the rim of her teacup with her finger, her mind already dissecting the puzzle of Lucas Fairchild's disappearance. She had come here seeking peace, but her instincts, honed by years of uncovering hidden truths, wouldn't allow her to sit idle. And then there was the nagging personal connection. The asylum's shadow loomed over her family as much as it did this place. Her observations began with the people. Henry Blackwell maintained a facade of calm as he reassured the guests, yet the tightness around his eyes betrayed his unease. Martha Langley shuffled through the room, her head bowed, her nervous glances darting toward the staircase. Dr. Havisham appeared composed, his gaze fixed on the morning newspaper, though Vivian noticed he hadn't turned a single page. Evelyn March's elegant exterior seemed to crack slightly, her fingers tapping restlessly against her coffee cup. Meanwhile, James Carter scribbled furiously in his notebook, his curiosity clearly piqued by the unfolding drama. After breakfast, Vivian returned to Lucas's room. The police had yet to arrive, a storm had washed out the nearby roads, and Henry had reluctantly allowed her access. The air inside the room was heavy, tinged with the faint floral note of lavender. She moved methodically, her eyes catching every detail. The broken lamp lay on the floor near the bedside table, shards of glass fanning out in a jagged pattern. Vivian crouched and carefully inspected the base, noticing smudges that suggested it had been gripped tightly before it shattered. The muddy footprints leading to the window told another story. Someone had entered or exited through the open frame. She traced the prints with her finger, noting their size and depth, then straightened to examine the smudged mirror above the dresser. A streak, as if wiped hastily, marred its surface, and a thin layer of dust clung to the edges, untouched. On the nightstand lay Lucas's pocket watch, its chain snapped and its hands frozen at 11:15. Vivian tilted it toward the light, spotting a faint fingerprint smudged on the glass casing. She slipped it into her handkerchief and carefully tucked it away. As she paced the room, her thoughts churned. The scene didn't suggest a simple altercation. There was a deliberateness to the chaos. Her mind drifted to Lucas himself, reclusive, watchful, always lingering at the edges of the crowd. What had brought him here? And why had he vanished? Speculation buzzed among the guests. By mid-afternoon, rumors of the asylum's dark past surfaced like bloated corpses. Some whispered of spirits wandering the halls, while others recalled the asylum's history of patient disappearances under the infamous Dr. Victor Harrow. The flickering lights and strange noises from the previous night seemed to lend credence to these tales, heightening the sense of unease. Vivian caught snippets of conversation as she moved through the hotel. "They say patients went missing without a trace," Martha murmured to a fellow maid, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were never found, just gone." James Carter, ever the opportunist, had positioned himself in the lounge, openly interrogating anyone who would indulge him. "You must admit the timing is uncanny," he said to Henry, his tone laced with suspicion. "A disappearance on the very night of your grand opening? It's almost poetic." Henry's response was curt. "I assure you, Mr. Carter, the hotel's past has nothing to do with what happened to Mr. Fairchild." But Vivian wasn't convinced. The asylum's past was like a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripples were unavoidable. She found herself drawn back to the tunnels beneath the hotel, the hidden passageways rumored to snake through the building's foundations. If Lucas had stumbled upon something meant to stay buried, it could explain the desperate struggle in his room. As dusk fell and the hotel's shadows deepened, Vivian's resolve hardened. She would piece together the puzzle, no matter where it led. Whether Lucas Fairchild had been taken or had uncovered something dangerous, the answers lay somewhere within the labyrinth of the Starlake Hotel. And Vivian, as always, would follow the trail. The following day dawned under a blanket of fog that clung to the lake and seeped into the grounds of Starlake Hotel. Inside, the grand halls seemed quieter, the guests subdued as if the building itself was holding its breath. Vivian Croswell found James Carter in the lounge, hunched over a small notebook, his pen scratching furiously across the page. His interest in Lucas Fairchild's disappearance bordered on obsessive, and Vivian knew his curiosity would be an asset, if guided correctly. "Mr. Carter," she began, her tone measured, "you seem well versed in the history of this place. What do you know of the asylum's past?" James looked up, his expression a mixture of intrigue and suspicion. "The kind of history that doesn't make it into brochures, you mean?" He gestured to the seat across from him, and Vivian obliged. "Let's say I'm interested in what might have drawn Lucas here," Vivian replied, her eyes sharp. James smirked, closing his notebook with a decisive snap. Starlake Asylum was notorious in its day. The director, Dr. Victor Harrow, was a brilliant but deeply disturbed man. Officially, he was conducting cutting-edge psychiatric research. Unofficially, patients began disappearing, always under the guise of being discharged. He leaned forward, his voice lowering conspiratorially. Rumors circulated of secret experiments. Harrow was fascinated by the human mind, particularly under extreme duress. Some say he believed he could unlock hidden potential through unconventional means. Vivian's fingers tightened around the armrest. "And these missing patients?" James shrugged. "Never found. The authorities investigated, but Harrow's records were meticulous. Too meticulous, if you ask me. He covered his tracks well." The conversation left a chill in its wake as Vivian left the lounge. She wandered the corridors, her thoughts churning. The asylum's history was a dark stain that no amount of gilding could conceal. Her musings were interrupted by a soft voice behind her. "Excuse me, miss," whispered Martha Langley, her eyes darting nervously to the sides. "I overheard you were asking about the asylum?" Vivian nodded, her expression neutral to encourage the timid maid. "Yes, do you know something?" Martha hesitated, then leaned closer. "There's talk among the staff about tunnels beneath the building. They say Dr. Harrow used them to move patients in and out without anyone noticing." "Tunnels?" Vivian pressed, her heartbeat quickening. "I don't know where they are," Martha stammered, wringing her hands. "But some say they're still there, hidden beneath the basement." With that, the maid scurried away, leaving Vivian to her thoughts. The existence of hidden passageways added a new layer to the mystery. If Lucas had discovered these tunnels, it could explain his disappearance and the signs of struggle in his room. That evening, the hotel library drew her like a moth to flame. The room was a testament to the building's grandeur. Dark mahogany shelves lined with leather tomes, their spines glinting under the dim light of brass sconces. But Vivian wasn't here to admire the decor. She began her search, combing through the shelves with practiced efficiency. After an hour of fruitless searching, she noticed a section near the back where the dust lay thick, undisturbed for years. Her fingers traced the spines until she found a heavy, unmarked volume. It resisted as she pulled, and with a soft groan, the book slid free, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay an old ledger, its leather cover cracked and its pages yellowed with age. Vivian carried it to a nearby table and opened it carefully. The contents chilled her, a meticulous record of patients admitted to the asylum, their conditions and dates of discharge. Yet many entries bore a sinister note: discharged by director's order, case closed. Her gaze lingered on one entry in particular: patient Mar 145, Margaret G. Croswell, discharged by director's order. Her late aunt's name stared back at her like an accusation. Vivian's breath caught as her resolve solidified. The past was clawing its way into the present, and she was determined to uncover its secrets, no matter the cost. The storm battered the walls of Starlake Hotel as Vivian Croswell worked her way through the grand hallways, her thoughts a labyrinth of possibilities. The discovery of the ledger haunted her, its entries a stark reminder that the past was far from buried. Each name in the book was a shadow, but one stood out above all: her aunt's. Vivian's resolve to uncover the truth sharpened as she began her quiet inquiries. In the morning, she found Henry Blackwell pacing the lobby, his charm wearing thin under the weight of the guests' unease. His warm smile flickered as Vivian approached. "Miss Croswell," he greeted, a trace of nervous energy in his voice. "Is there something I can assist you with?" Vivian tilted her head, her gaze steady. "What can you tell me about Dr. Victor Harrow? His name seems to linger in this place." Henry's expression hardened briefly before his charm returned. An unfortunate chapter of the asylum's history, but one we've put behind us. The hotel represents a new beginning. And yet, Vivian pressed, his methods and the disappearances remain a point of speculation. Henry's jaw tightened. Stories grow more elaborate with time. I assure you, the hotel is entirely separate from those old rumors. Vivian noticed his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides, the faintest crack in his polished demeanor. She filed the reaction away as she thanked him and moved on. Later, in the shadowed corridors of the second floor, she caught Martha Langley slipping out of Lucas's room. The maid froze, clutching a small bundle wrapped in linen. "What are you doing in there?" Vivian asked, her tone calm but firm. I was just retrieving something," Martha stammered, her fingers trembling. "Mr. Fairchild left it behind, and I thought—" Vivian stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Left it behind? Lucas hasn't been seen since the night he vanished. What exactly are you looking for?" Martha's gaze darted nervously to the bundle in her hands. "It's just a personal item," she whispered. "Nothing important." Vivian didn't press further. But the encounter left her with more questions than answers. Whatever Martha was hiding, it tied her to the growing mystery. The lounge, dimly lit and hushed, was where Vivian found Evelyn March reclining on a velvet chaise, her elegance undiminished by the tense atmosphere. A crystal glass of brandy rested in her hand, and her gaze drifted lazily toward Vivian as she approached. "Evelyn," Vivian began smoothly, "you seemed shaken the night Lucas disappeared. Did you know him well?" Evelyn's grip on her glass tightened ever so slightly. "We've crossed paths before," she admitted, her voice cool. "A mutual acquaintance introduced us some time ago. Nothing of note." "But you were seen speaking to him at dinner," Vivian pressed. "What did you discuss?" Evelyn's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Small talk, nothing more. I don't see what this has to do with his disappearance." Vivian noted the deflection and decided to let the question linger unanswered. Evelyn's polished facade was beginning to crack, and the truth, whatever it was, lay just beneath the surface. That evening, Vivian returned to Lucas's room. The air felt heavier, as though the walls themselves held their breath. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning every detail until they landed on a porcelain vase atop the dresser. Something about it seemed out of place. Lifting the vase, she found a small brass key hidden beneath it, its surface tarnished with age. She turned it over in her palm and noticed the faint engraving of initials, VH. Vivian's heart quickened. "Victor Harrow," she murmured. The key was a piece of the puzzle, but to what lock did it belong? Before retiring for the night, Vivian returned to the library and the ledger that had unsettled her so deeply. She flipped through the brittle pages until she came to the entry for her aunt. Opposite her name was a date and a scrawled note. Vivian's breath caught as she noticed a photograph tucked between the pages. A group of asylum staff and patients, their faces blurred with time. One figure stood out, a woman whose features bore a striking resemblance to her aunt's. The connection was no longer speculative, it was tangible. The key, the ledger, the photograph, all threads in a web that tied her not just to the mystery of Lucas Fairchild, but to the asylum's dark legacy. Vivian's resolve deepened. The secrets of Starlake would not remain hidden for long. The basement of Starlake Hotel was a labyrinth of shadows, its walls heavy with the weight of time. Vivian Croswell descended cautiously, the brass key engraved with VH clutched tightly in her hand. A single dim bulb swayed above the staircase, casting flickering light that danced across the damp stone walls. Each step echoed faintly, as though the building itself was warning her to turn back. At the base of the stairs, the cold air thickened, carrying the faint metallic tang of rust and decay. Vivian swept her flashlight over the crumbling mortar, her sharp eyes searching for anomalies. Then her beam caught it, a faint seam in the stone wall, almost imperceptible, but there. She ran her fingers along the edges and found a small brass lock embedded in the stone, its tarnish matching the key. With a click, the lock gave way, and the hidden door groaned as it swung inward, revealing a dark passage descending further into the earth. The air grew colder as she stepped inside, the narrow tunnel closing around her like a tomb. Vivian's every sense was heightened, her breath visible in the frigid air as she pressed forward. The tunnel stretched in uneven lengths, its walls lined with ancient bricks slick with condensation. Rusting pipes ran overhead, occasionally dripping water that pooled on the uneven floor. Vivian's footsteps were muted by the damp ground, but the oppressive silence magnified every small sound, the skitter of unseen vermin, the faint groan of shifting earth. As she advanced, her light swept across remnants of a forgotten world. Rusted medical gurneys lay abandoned in alcoves, their once sterile surfaces pitted and stained. A tray of surgical instruments rested on a crumbling ledge, the scalpels and clamps dulled by decades of neglect. Vivian shuddered at the implications, her mind filling in the gaps with grim possibilities. Her flashlight flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, she was plunged into darkness. She slapped the casing, her breath quickening as the light sputtered back to life. That was when she heard it, a faint, deliberate sound. Footsteps. Vivian froze, her pulse pounding in her ears. The steps were slow and measured, closing in from deeper within the tunnel. She extinguished her light and pressed herself against the wall, her body tense as she strained to hear. The steps stopped, the silence oppressive. Then came the faint scrape of metal on stone, as though someone or something was dragging an object. Summoning her courage, Vivian turned her light back on, the beam cutting through the darkness. The tunnel ahead was empty, but the sound lingered, a ghostly echo fading into the distance. Her heart raced, but she pressed on, determined not to let fear drive her back. Deeper into the tunnels, she discovered a small, dilapidated room. The remnants of an old office were scattered across the floor, a rusted filing cabinet, a broken chair, and a desk layered with dust and decay. But it was what lay on the desk that captured her attention, a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked with age. Vivian opened it carefully, her flashlight illuminating the faded handwriting within. The journal belonged to one of Dr. Harrow's patients. Page after page described the so-called treatments administered in the asylum's depths, experiments designed to push the human mind to its breaking point. Vivian's stomach turned as she read about the isolation chambers, the sensory deprivation, and the injections of unknown substances. One passage caught her eye. "They say we are being freed, but we are only being buried deeper." She turned the final page and found a folded piece of paper tucked within. It was a crude map, the tunnels sketched in hurried strokes, with one section marked by an ominous X. Vivian traced the lines with her finger, memorizing the layout. If Lucas had found this map, it could explain his disappearance and his struggle to escape. Nearby, a splash of deep red glistened faintly under her light. Vivian knelt, her breath catching as she examined the blood-stained fabric of a coat. It was the same shade and cut as the hotel staff uniforms. Carefully, she lifted it, noting the initials embroidered inside the collar. ML, Martha Langley. Vivian's mind reeled as she pieced together the clues. The tunnels held the asylum's darkest secrets, and someone was determined to keep them hidden. Whatever had happened to Lucas Fairchild, she was now certain his disappearance was no accident. And the danger lurking in the shadows was closer than anyone realized. The sound of footsteps returned, this time faster, more insistent. Vivian extinguished her light and slipped into the shadows, her heart pounding as she waited for the unseen figure to pass. The hunt was far from over, but she was closing in on the truth. The morning after her descent into the tunnels, Vivian Croswell found the hotel shrouded in a heavy fog, the lake beyond the grounds barely visible. The guests were restless, the air thick with unspoken fears. Whispers followed Vivian as she moved through the halls, her mind replaying the ominous details she'd uncovered in the depths of the asylum. At breakfast, Evelyn March was notably absent. Her empty chair, draped with an elegant silk scarf the night before, seemed a glaring omission. When Evelyn didn't appear by mid-morning, the staff began discreet inquiries, but by noon, the truth could no longer be ignored. Evelyn was missing. Henry Blackwell convened the guests in the grand parlor, his usually composed demeanor fraying at the edges. "We will search the grounds thoroughly," he announced, his voice firm but lacking its usual confidence. Evelyn must have wandered off, perhaps disoriented. Vivian spoke up, her tone cutting through the nervous murmurs. "Wandered off? And left her scarf near the entrance to the tunnels?" All eyes turned to her as she produced the delicate silk scarf, now damp and stained with dirt. A murmur of unease rippled through the room. Henry's face darkened. "That's quite an accusation, Miss Croswell. I don't know what you're implying, but I assure you—" "I'm implying," Vivian interrupted, her voice sharp, that the past you claim to have buried is very much alive. First Lucas, now Evelyn, and both vanishances are tied to this place's dark history. Henry bristled. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Vivian pressed. You've downplayed the asylum's past, but you can't deny its grip on this hotel's, the experiments, Dr. Harrow's twisted legacy. How much of it have you kept hidden? Henry hesitated, his carefully constructed facade cracking. I inherited the asylum, he said finally, his voice low. It came to me through my grandfather's estate. I had no intention of reopening it, but the property was valuable and investors saw potential. I didn't ask too many questions about its history. Convenient, Vivian said coldly. But you knew enough to leave certain parts of the building untouched, didn't you? Like the tunnels. Henry's silence spoke volumes. Vivian left the parlor, her mind racing. Henry's admission, though damning, wasn't enough. She needed to understand the connection between Lucas and Evelyn. Retrieving her notebook, she reviewed her observations, tracing the threads of the mystery. Evelyn had hinted at knowing Lucas before the grand opening, though she'd deflected when questioned. What bond could exist between the reclusive guest and the glamorous socialite? It wasn't until Vivian recalled the ledger and its damning entries that a new possibility emerged: blackmail. Vivian hurried to the library, the heavy ledger still tucked away in its hidden compartment. Flipping through the pages, she found what she was looking for: a series of notations beside certain patients' names, payments, cryptic initials, and dates aligned in an ominous pattern. The final entry underlined her suspicion. LF and EM were marked with the same set of initials, VH. Dr. Harrow's experiments hadn't just been scientific curiosities, they were leverage, blackmail, extortion, perhaps even silencing those who knew too much. Lucas and Evelyn had both been drawn here for a reason, and now they were paying the price. The weight of her discovery pressed heavily on Vivian as she returned to her room. A second disappearance had cast a longer shadow over Starlake Hotel, and she knew the answers lay in the tunnels and in the secrets the asylum had refused to relinquish. The truth was coming into focus, but with each revelation the danger grew sharper. Evelyn's fate was still unknown, but one thing was certain: the web of lies spun by Dr. Harrow had outlived him, and someone was determined to keep it intact. The storm outside raged with renewed ferocity, its howling winds and torrential rain creating a natural backdrop for the storm brewing within Starlake Hotel. Vivian Croswell paced her room, her mind weaving a plan as the puzzle pieces of the mystery clicked into place. She had no doubt now. Dr. Edward Havisham was the key to the disappearances. His unnerving fascination with the asylum's history, coupled with the evidence she had gathered, pointed to a dark obsession, one that mirrored Dr. Harrow's twisted legacy. To expose him, Vivian would need to draw him out, force him to reveal himself in front of the others. The trap she devised was simple but effective: a staged gathering in the grand parlor where she would confront Havisham with her discoveries and push him to act. That evening, Vivian summoned the remaining guests and staff to the parlor under the pretense of discussing Evelyn's disappearance. The room was heavy with tension, the flickering firelight casting long shadows on the walls. Henry Blackwell, Martha Langley, and James Carter stood near the fireplace, their unease palpable. Dr. Havisham entered last, his calm demeanor unchanged, though his sharp eyes flicked toward Vivian with a hint of suspicion. "Thank you all for coming," Vivian began, her voice steady. "As you know, Evelyn March vanished last night following Lucas Fairchild's unexplained disappearance. I believe I've uncovered the truth behind these events, and it's time we face it together." The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Vivian stepped forward, holding the brass key she had found in Lucas's room. "This key," she said, "unlocked the hidden tunnels beneath the hotel, tunnels once used by Dr. Victor Harrow to conduct his cruel experiments, but those experiments didn't end with Harrow's death." Her gaze locked onto Dr. Havisham. "Did they, Doctor?" Havisham's expression remained impassive, but a flicker of something, recognition perhaps, passed through his eyes. "That's a bold accusation, Miss Croswell," he said smoothly. "I'm merely a historian, fascinated by the past." "Fascinated enough to recreate it?" Vivian countered. "You've been using those tunnels, continuing Harrow's work under the guise of research. Lucas Fairchild discovered your secret, and Evelyn was helping him expose it." The guests exchanged startled glances, their fear growing as Vivian continued. Lucas didn't vanish, he was lured into the tunnels. And Evelyn, she knew too much. "I won't listen to these wild allegations," Havisham snapped, his composure slipping. "You're grasping at shadows." Vivian reached into her coat and produced the patient's journal she had found in the tunnels. This journal details Harrow's experiments. Experiments disturbingly similar to the methods described in your own academic papers, Doctor. You've been using Harrow's notes, haven't you? Havisham's eyes narrowed, his mask of civility crumbling. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he hissed. But Vivian wasn't finished. She turned to the others. Lucas stumbled upon the truth, and Evelyn followed him into the tunnels to uncover the full extent of Havisham's experiments. That's why they're gone, because they threatened to expose him. Suddenly, the parlor door creaked open. A gust of cold air swept in, and there, standing in the doorway, was Evelyn March. Her hair was disheveled, her face pale, but her eyes blazed with defiance. "She's right," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite her haggard appearance. "Haven't tried to trap me in the tunnels, just like Lucas." The room erupted in gasps. Havisham's face twisted into a snarl, and in a flash he lunged toward Evelyn. But Vivian was ready. She stepped between them, her stance firm, as Henry and James rushed forward to restrain Havisham. "It's over, Doctor," Vivian said coldly. "Your secret is out." As Havisham was subdued and the authorities summoned, the parlor settled into an uneasy calm. Evelyn recounted her harrowing escape, her words confirming everything Vivian had suspected. Lucas, it seemed, had been silenced to protect Havisham's twisted operation. Though his fate remained uncertain, justice for his discovery had begun. Vivian stood by the window, the storm outside beginning to wane. The shadows that had haunted Starlake Hotel were finally being dragged into the light. But as she watched the rain slick the stone paths, she couldn't shake the feeling that the true extent of the asylum's secrets had yet to be uncovered. The storm had passed by the time dawn stretched pale fingers of light over Starlake Hotel. The once foreboding building now stood silent, its secrets laid bare. Dr. Edward Havisham was led away in handcuffs by the authorities, his once composed demeanor replaced by a hollow, defeated gaze. As he disappeared into the fog, a palpable weight lifted from the air, though the lingering scars of the night's revelations remained. The guests gathered in the parlor, their faces etched with exhaustion and disbelief. Henry Blackwell stood near the hearth, his usual charm replaced by a somber weariness. Martha Langley clutched a cup of tea, her hands still trembling. James Carter sat in a corner, his notebook open but untouched, as though even his sharp pen had been dulled by the ordeal. Evelyn March, though visibly shaken, maintained her composure. She spoke quietly with the authorities, recounting her escape and confirming Havisham's guilt. Vivian Croswell observed from a distance, her sharp mind cataloging every detail. She knew this moment wasn't just about solving a mystery, it was about closure, for herself and for those whose lives had been touched by the asylum's dark history. As the room emptied, Vivian found herself alone by the library's hearth. She retrieved the worn ledger from its hidden compartment and opened it to her aunt's entry. Margaret G. Croswell, discharged by director's order. Her fingers traced the faded ink, her mind drifting back to the stories her mother had whispered in hushed tones, the veiled references to Margaret's fragile state. The asylum's darkness had touched her family. And now, decades later, Vivian had unraveled its shadowy threads. Justice, she realized, wasn't just about punishing the guilty. It was about honoring the forgotten, giving voice to the silenced. Her aunt's story, and those of the other patients, would no longer remain hidden in the shadows of Starlake. As dawn broke fully, casting a golden glow over the lake, Vivian stood by the grand front doors of the hotel. The waters reflected the soft hues of sunrise, their surface rippling gently in the morning breeze. The storm had cleansed the air, leaving it crisp and cool. Henry Blackwell approached, his expression earnest. "Miss Croswell," he began, his voice low, "I want to thank you. Without you, who knows how much longer Havisham's madness would have gone unchecked." Vivian nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. "The truth has a way of surfacing, Mr. Blackwell. It was only a matter of time." As he retreated, Vivian took one last look at the hotel, its grandeur now tempered by a deeper understanding of its history. She had come seeking peace, but had found purpose instead. The shadows of Starlake Asylum would no longer haunt her. They had been confronted and dispelled. Vivian stepped into the waiting car, her bag resting beside her on the seat. As the driver pulled away, she gazed out the window at the lake, its waters shimmering in the gentle light. The world felt quiet, renewed, as though nature itself had exhaled a sigh of relief. Though her journey at Starlake had ended, Vivian knew her path as an investigator was far from over. Mysteries, like the human spirit, had a way of enduring, but so did the drive to uncover them. She carried with her a renewed sense of purpose, ready for whatever shadows might cross her path next. As the car wound its way down the road, the Starlake Hotel grew smaller in the distance, its silhouette softened by the light of a new day. Vivian Croswell once again uncovered the truth, and with it, found her own quiet victory.